Last First Day, I shared with some of you some of the reasons that Christmas is important to me. For me, the Christmas season is truly wonderful and magical. I particularly love the practice of Advent, the season of retelling the Christmas story and retelling the wisdom that is found in that story as we prepare ourselves to celebrate Christmas. The Christmas story does not need to be factually true in order to be real. It does not need to be real in order to be true. The story of Mary, a young woman from a small town in an occupied country who had the courage to welcome God into the world. This is a story that I believe in. I believe in it even though it is impossible and amazing and wondrous and wild. Perhaps that is why I believe in it. Perhaps that is why I love it so much. It is challenging. It's a countercultural story. I believe that if we read the Christmas story deeply, if we engage with the wisdom there, then we should find it troubling. We should find it troubling. This story of how the lowliest places can become holy. This story about a young couple who are turned away, who are left in the cold to have their baby in a stable. This story should be troubling and wondrous. This is a story about farmers, hardworking men, and how they were the first to recognize that something sacred was happening, the first to recognize the divine mystery. Isn't it amazing that the shepherds come before the kings? Isn't that wondrous and perhaps also troubling? This is a story about welcome, this story that takes place in Bethlehem. And it's a story that should teach us not only how to welcome God among us, not just in the Christmas season, but every day of the year, but it should also urge us to welcome each other. This story should teach us how to welcome one another, as well as how to welcome God in our midst. And within this amazing and wondrous story, Joseph is an often overlooked character. I myself have never given a message before on Joseph. This is my first one. I think I've given 6, maybe 7 on Mary. And honestly, I think it's okay. I think it's okay that Joseph doesn't have the spotlight. I think even though he is not a central character, he still has an important role to play. He plays the role of ally in this story. And when we look closely at how he plays that role, I think it has something important to teach us about how all of us can be better allies. The work of being an ally is essential because if we cannot be good allies to each other, then we cannot welcome one another. True, authentic welcome does not happen unless you can be a good ally. As this beautiful poem that I shared with all of you by Anne Weems reminds us, Joseph is faithful. He is faithful to Mary, supporting her as she follows God's call. He is faithful to her, even though he must surely have been ridiculed by his community for that faithfulness. He is faithful to her, although it meant hardship for him. He is faithful to her, even though he perhaps does not fully understand the task that she has undertaken. He is faithful to her, although he does not understand what it is like to carry the divine presence within. And Joseph is more than faithful. He also cares for Mary. In the words of Anne Weems, actually, Joseph probably stood in the doorway, guarding the mother and child, or greeting shepherds and kings. When he wasn't in the doorway, he was probably urging Mary to get some rest, gently covering her in his cloak, assuring her that he could watch the child. We can suppose that he loved Mary, that he provides her with the care and support that she needs. He provides the backup, the help when it is needed and wanted. We can also imagine him using his power as a man. He would have had significantly more power than Mary, in order to help Mary fulfill her wondrous call. I think perhaps most importantly, Joseph doesn't steal Mary's thunder. The story isn't about him. It isn't about him. And we don't get a lot of extra words from him. He doesn't try to force his way into the spotlight. He doesn't try to make the story about him. We don't hear him talking about how favored he is and how much God loves him, although, of course, God did. We don't hear him talking about what a great ministry he has as the father of Jesus, because the story isn't about him. It's about God. And it is about Mary's faithfulness to God's call. Joseph models perhaps the most important behavior of an ally, which is that he doesn't make it about himself. What does it mean to be an ally? Perhaps some of you know this term, have heard it said before. What can we learn from Joseph about doing this work? Being a good ally is about listening more than speaking. It's about being attentive to the experience of another person who is different from yourself. It's about practicing empathy, kindness, and care towards someone who has lived and suffered in ways that perhaps you cannot even imagine. It's about being kind to someone who you maybe do not understand, someone who you may never fully understand. It's about asking someone what they need, rather than deciding for them what their needs are. Actually, it's about bowing completely to someone else's perspective, to their experience and wisdom. They have lived a life that you have not. And it's about not trying to make your relationship with that person be about yourself. Being a good ally is about understanding that sometimes it isn't about you. As a place of welcome, which this is, and as a people of welcome, we need to know how to be good allies. We cannot welcome if we are not allies. I believe that it is true that we cannot fully welcome as a community our gay and lesbian, transgender, queer, intersex neighbors if we are not good allies to them. As an almost entirely white community, I believe that it is essential that we know how to be good allies to people of color so that we can welcome them. Those of you who are men, I believe that it is essential that you know how to be a good ally to the women of our community in order to fully welcome them. Being an ally is about being sympathetic to those who are different, but more than sympathetic, it is about understanding that sometimes the story isn't about you. It's about listening more than speaking, about bowing to the wisdom of someone else, about understanding that sometimes you won't understand. It's about lending your power and your voice to help others, but only when they ask for that help. It's about not deciding for someone else what they need, but instead only of supplying what they ask for. I believe that Joseph teaches us how to do this work. He teaches us how to welcome each other like allies. And I believe that ultimately, if we welcome like allies, then we welcome God. I believe that when we welcome like Joseph with humbleness, with care and compassion, that we are doing the true work of Christmas, the work of welcoming the divine among us as we welcome each other. Friends, let us listen well and care deeply. Let us use our power to help those who are carrying burdens that we may not understand. Let us not try to make the story about us, but instead, let us be willing to stand beside our friends and our neighbors, to lend them the care that they need, to help them with what power we may have. Let us be willing to step outside of our experiences, outside of our own needs, and instead, let us be attentive to the needs of others. Friends, as we reach this, our second Sunday in our journey towards Christmas, let us commit ourselves to welcoming with the courage of Mary and with the humbleness of Joseph.